Welcome to r/Entitled People, where we share stories from your lives about people who think the rules don't apply to them, and they should get what they want. Thank you, friends, for subscribing to the channel, and for so many likes. And today we have 3 great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story, The Tale of the Entitled Cruiser, a journey of cultural disrespect and outrageous souvenir hoarding. The second story, a saga of lies, incompetence, and the final stand against corporate chaos. The third story, the rise and fall of a cheapskate owner, how a team saved a project twice, only to quit again due to unfair treatment. The first story is, woman on small cruise ship quickly gets labeled the first person to be voted off the ship because of her entitled behavior. My father passed in 1999. And in 2000, my mother took me on a 3-week trip to remote areas of the western South Pacific, including some very remote islands, where no white person had set foot in almost a decade. Not all were that remote, but most of them were. After flying in from Cairns, Australia, to edited Port Moresby, New Guinea, we were taken by a minibus to do some touristy stuff for a few hours, before being taken to the ship. One of the stops was at a large outdoor artisan shop, and we were told that we had about half an hour to look around and buy some things before getting back on our bus and going to the ship. We were told what time we needed to be back on the minibus, and when the bulk of the group was getting back on, one woman, who I'll call EP for entitled passenger, had already planted herself in the front, with several huge bags of souvenirs that she had placed around her and in her lap, sticking out into the aisle. The guide was a young woman who was only with us for a few hours, and evidently didn't feel comfortable taking control of the situation. So after everyone else had to partly climb over her bags to get further into the bus, several passengers, in a group that was all 60+ years old except me, the baby at 42, had to perch on very uncomfortable jump seats that folded down from the main seats. And yes, since I was the baby, I volunteered to be one of those people. That was just the beginning. At each of the islands we stopped at, they welcomed us with cultural activities, always including dances. After a couple of islands, it became obvious that EP was going to make a habit of going straight to the handcrafted tables, perching on her cane and tripod chair, and ordered the natives to bring to her any items from the tables that she wished to see. By the time the dances were finished and the rest of us got there, she had already bought dozens of items, leaving an insufficient number of pieces for the number of passengers that were left. Then we went to Rabaul, New Britain, where there is a traditional fire dance performed called baining. The performer dances through fire while wearing giant masks that are typically 5 feet high, 3 feet wide, and 1 to 3 feet from front to back. There were 6 dancers, so 6 masks, and somebody asked if they would be able to make more in time for their next scheduled performance. Would they be willing to bring these masks to the ship afterwards so people could have a chance to buy them? Sometime after the dances were over, one of the performers drove the masks in a truck to the ship, where EP had been waiting for them on the dock, and proceeded to buy 3 of the 6 masks, while other passengers who had gone back to their cabins were still figuring out the masks had arrived, and were making their way back down to the dock. That night, her roommate was moved into a single empty cabin, at no extra cost, because there was literally no more room for her or her stuff in their cabin, and within a few more days, housekeeping was unable to get into the cabin to clean. At the end of the trip, the cruise company offered to help people box up and weigh their packages of souvenirs to send home, and EP had an absolute fit when she was told that they didn't have the boxes or the staff to help her pack up her cabin full of souvenirs, especially the masks. I have no idea how she managed to get all that stuff shipped back home after we landed. My mother had traveled with this company many times before with my father, and there was always one owner of the company on every cruise, so they knew her pretty well, and were all very open with her about stuff going on her cruises. The owner on that one told my mother that EP was definitely blacklisted, and their staff back home had already been instructed that if she ever tried to book another trip with them again, they were to tell her they were full. Edited. Some of you are so privileged, ignorant, and unimaginative that you apparently can't even conceive of the possibility that there are still people in the world who live in such remote places that they didn't even have pens and had never seen a video camera by the year 2000, and your only way to resolve your cognitive dissonance is to assume I made all this up. Edited again. Someone accurately pointed out that I mentioned nothing further about voting her off the ship. Although it was almost unanimous among both passengers and crew and staff, of course it was only a virtual vote and desire. It was obviously impossible to follow through on because they couldn't just abandon her on one of the islands and go sailing off, or throw her and all her souvenirs overboard. The second story is Escape from the Cybersecurity Nightmare. I've been stuck at the bottom rung of IT for over a decade of my career. No opportunities to move up. I started college to specialize in cybersecurity in the hopes of getting something moving. My professor knew I was looking and had me send him my resume. I was contacted by a company that wanted to hire people to build a secure operations center locally. Foot in the door at a cybersecurity startup seemed too good to be true, and it was. Basically, everything they said in some way was overconfidence, exaggeration, or outright lies. They had no training program. The chief information security officer was vaporware. It turned out to be some harebrained scheme from a tightwad Indian-owned conglomerate to make quick money off of the cybersecurity boom. But they didn't want to put in money to do it properly. And they also wanted to use us as pawns to fight eminent domain with the city because they had investment property they had promised to develop and deliver high-paid, high-tech jobs, and had done neither. So they told the city they had a company coming in to sign a lease to bring 400 cybersecurity jobs in the area. But really, it's their own company and has literally nothing. It wasn't an established business expanding. They also slapped some cheap Walmart-grade finishings on some of the property to make some usable-looking office space. After being gaslit and lied to, and seeing there was no future in this charade, many people started quitting. They had no idea what they were doing in that industry. The few consultants they had who knew something they ignored. It was truly a ridiculous place. I could go on and on about all its peculiarities, but a few major issues had 3 other people quit in the span of less than a week. I knew I had to get out, and so I started applying for jobs. At the same time, being the only person there with any real knowledge of IT, I got saddled with tons of non-security general IT crap, and I had been tasked with outfitting a conference room for an upcoming catered dinner for potential investors. Indian investors from the company's main money-making industry. Probably the best opportunity the company had to make a sale at all. And by this point, pouring money down a rat hole had obviously started to get the higher-ups in the company, so they were getting really pushy about the sales agenda, even though we had no product to sell and no trained team of people capable of delivering it. I was given fairly short notice of this event to plan and install everything. I researched and planned, put a projector, speaker, and microphone system, and sent in the list of stuff to buy with just over a week to get all the stuff and install it. Took me an afternoon to research and plan, but I was harassed about the progress of the project basically non-stop from the moment it was dumped on me, including while I was just waiting on stuff to be ordered and show up, and when some of the things started arriving, but nothing that could really be installed without more stuff showing up. All of the ordering was out of my hands. They had a guy for that, you see, a worthless individual whose sole job is to do something I could do by clicking checkout after searching for the parts that were needed. This is apparently a hallmark of Indian companies. For every worker in a Western nation, there are 2 or 3 employed in India remotely doing almost entirely worthless tasks. I sent the list. That was all I could do. When finally I could start, it was getting down to the last minute, by which point I had already been applying to other jobs and doing Zoom interviews in between installing AV components. I was pulled away from working on this to have another moronic meeting for them to gaslight everyone and talk more about sales, during which I was being harassed by one of the most important people in the company via text about when I would be done so their cleaning people could clean the conference room. While I was trying to reply to the hounding on my phone, the dupe who hired me that turned out to be a former small school volleyball coach who had gotten an online MBA but knew nothing about business or cybersecurity scolded me for being on my phone during one of their super important meetings, although he was of course on his phone, and then also let me know via phone message during the meeting that the most critical parts, the projector and amplifier, wouldn't be arriving in time and the order was canceled. Just go get something local, which of course isn't possible. These idiots who gatekeep simple functions like ordering parts off of Amazon hadn't gotten faster or priority shipping or handling for the super important event. So by that point I had it, and while I was looking at locally sourced amplifiers, which of course there were none that would work with the other parts, I got a call back from a place I had interviewed with wanting to know when I could start. I told them as soon as they want me. I then packed all the AV equipment into a side room, messaged the nagging lady that the room could be cleaned now, packed up all my personal tools I'd been using to do work for them, took them to my car, peeled the company magnet off my car, went in and said goodbye to everyone there that I liked, and then went to the new HR girl who had only been there a week, but had been handed in short notice quittings from 3 other people, and gave her the car magnet and my keys, said I quit and walked out. I was told by people who were still working there that the HR girl delivered my stuff, during a presentation in a meeting to the doopy volleyball coach, who proceeded to look dumbfounded and confused. I ignored literally dozens of phone calls and texts from the dupe and other management, including the nagging lady, who all just couldn't understand why I would leave. After I left, the quittings just continued to come. Eventually, they ended up with almost nobody there. One of their interns finally, just in the last week, got a real internship at an actual business. You know your business sucks if people quit despite being paid to do nearly nothing. They're the most inept and shady business I've ever dealt with. I've only just scratched the surface of everything wrong with that place, and I've already typed a mini novel. The third story is, owner got the whole team to quit before we came in. We convinced the team to unquit, and then he didn't want to pay us anymore, so everyone quit a second time. We, 2 software developers, were brought in towards the end of a project to help optimize and get the product shippable. We got a tour, met the development team, and talked money with the owner. The very first morning of our very first day, before we had even made it to the office, the entire development team disappeared. One developer was fired without notice, and the other 2 quit on the spot because they had had enough. So we walked into an empty office with the entire body of knowledge for that project just poofed into non-existence. The first thing we had to do was sit down with the owner and tell him he couldn't just do that, and that we weren't able to do our jobs if everyone was gone. He promised to unfire the fired developer, and with that we were able to convince the other 2 to unquit. We got the team reassembled and get to work, making significant progress. The product was being optimized and refined, bad code was being culled, the user experience was being streamlined, and most importantly, the whole team was having fun, probably for the first time ever. We ended up with a really great team and we were able to get a lot done. This carried on for a few months. Unfortunately, the owner had several things going against him. 1, we were hired as contractors, and thus had no strong connection to him or the company. If things went south, we had no problems dropping him and leaving. He was a cheap bee when it came to his employees, and was constantly complaining about how expensive we were. We weren't. This is the same guy that liked to brag about the $1 million plus AC unit for the related brick-and-mortar location he was building. He needed us, and because our rate was already so low, we had no interest in playing wheelie-dealy businessman with him. He hated that we wouldn't negotiate our prices. He had a horrible case of outsourcing syndrome, and would say stupid SH like, "Oh, you guys are so expensive. I can get my Indian team to do this work for only $7 an hour," every time he cut us a check. Ultimately, construction on the related building slowed, and ran far over deadline. If I had to hazard a guess, it was because the owner kept changing the plan. The guy we got unfired left to do software development work for a certain national bank for a much larger salary. The owner decided he wanted to unilaterally change our contract and pay us by the feature instead of by the hour, which just led to us billing him at a higher rate because we surely weren't going to underestimate our workload. He ended up putting us on hold, and we decided to cash that last check and wash our hands of the whole thing. The remaining 2 developers limped along for about a week before jumping ship. Last I heard from them was the owner's pet visa slave asking me for help with the project. I felt pretty bad for the guy, but after dealing with his boss, I wasn't going to help with anything I hadn't personally worked on, and even then it'd only be answering general questions. I've still got access to the repo, and it hasn't been touched since we left. They probably don't even know how to access it. Hope your Indian team can get you out of this one, R. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to know when the new video comes out, and hit the like button to support the channel. Have a good day.